Thank you, Pam, and good morning, everyone. What I'm going to do is provide you an overview of mental illness in Australia. Then I'll start to focus on the mining industry, particularly work that I did in Western Australia with fly-in, fly-out workers. My view would be, when you look at this information and the evidence-based research that I present, think of the workplaces that you're currently working in and normally the continuous shift rosters that people struggle with. The other issue for Tasmania is a lot of your mining communities are in remote areas of the state where there are limited resources, and certainly that's the issue that strikes home in other parts of Australia. The challenge with mental health is that 3 million Australians are living with depression or anxiety, and 7% of workers develop clinically depressed symptoms in any 1 year. That means 1 in 5 people could be experiencing mental illness in the last 12 months. So normally when I say 1 in 5, everyone looks around the room and thinks, which one of us is it today? And I hope it's not the guy at the front. The way I want you to think about 1 in 5 is think about everyone that comes to your kitchen table. Think about your family, your friends, your neighbours' kids. Think about the people that you work with. Think about the social groups, the sporting groups that you're in. Think about the people that are on your Facebook group. Think about 1 in 5 in that sort of community, the community of people that are relevant to you and relevant to your family. And guess what? You'll probably see people that are struggling. And hopefully this presentation will give you some guidance in where to go and what to do with the material.
Sorry, Steve, it's F5 on the laptop.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's a bit easier, thank you. One of the issues that you find in rural, regional and remote communities, including mining, is the impact of mental health. And if you have a look at the numbers, they track from left to right. You can see numbers getting larger are bad, and you can see that the rates per 100,000 in population become double in some aspects of the numbers as they track through major cities, interregional, remote, and then very remote. So people are being struck down at a rate that's far greater than the 1 in 5 calculation that I showed you before. That's an average, and we know what average numbers do to statistics. The other issue that you find in remote communities or those that have limited access to resources is that timely diagnosis, treatment and ongoing management of mental health is likely not to occur or to occur much later in terms of the illness. So when people become unwell, their recovery takes much longer because the intervention to put them on the road to the recovery comes so much later. And you can see in hospitalisation rates and the number of bed days in major cities, and once again, track right, as you get further and further away from cities and less access to resources, the numbers get worse. Do these numbers surprise you at all? No. I can see a number of people shaking their heads. Particularly if you're active in your community, you'll know the stories, you'll see the human damage of these issues when people go missing for 3 months or 4 months. And in my town of Broken Hill, we used to say that, you know, Bill or Jill or Jack or John or Joan, they've had a touch of the nerves and we wouldn't see them for about 6 months. And then as they re-entered back into the community, it was always a struggle because they'd been disconnected from those family supports and those friend supports while they sought treatment, and people then didn't know how to approach them, what to say, what to do and how to manage it when they re-emerged in the community. And it could be after treatment that lasted, and you look at the number of bed days, up to 6 months. Mental illness, and this is a demographic graph of when people are struck down with mental illness. And you can see through the teenage years, it really increases. So the best advice that I could give to you if you have teenagers, don't think it's a phase that they're going through. If they do show any signs and symptoms of depression or anxiety, scoop them up and get them to your local GP so they can be assessed, and they can, because you never know what you could be dealing with. So, you know, once again, if I look at my youth, when people were struggling in teenage years in Broken Hill, it would be, oh, they'll work through it. It's just a phase that they're going through. And you'll hear those comments made around kitchen tables from time to time in terms of the impact of this. But as you can see from these statistics, most people are struck down through their prime working lives, and I'll give you more and more granular material around what causes some of those events and how you can actually bring about constructive change. What's the impact on the person? Mental illness, as I said, tends to occur most during prime years. There's an extra workload on co-workers and supervisors. So when our little organisation is brought into large corporations, small businesses, or even micro businesses, it's normally by people that just can't carry people any longer. And they're struggling to maintain the workload. And people carry people with an illness, whether it be physical or mental, a long way for a long time, but then they start to get tired. And when they don't know what to do, it's, we've just had enough. Can you get rid of this person? Can you find me a new one? Because we just don't know what to do and how to do it. And that puts workplaces in a state of crisis, depending on what the circumstances are and the individuals affected. 1 in 5 take sick leave due to a mental health problem. The longer the sick leave, the less likely they return to work. And eventually people find it difficult to hold down a job, unemployment and early retirement. 78% of full-time workers don't seek treatment. So if you've got a workplace where you've got 500 people, let's play the numbers game. Of that 500, 100 could be struggling. 78 of that 100 won't seek any form of treatment. So what we'll do is we'll talk through the reasons why they don't seek treatment and how you can improve help-seeking behaviour so people know where to go, what to do, and are encouraged to go. We talked about the length of delay in help-seeking. It's really the strongest predictor of long-term sick leave, so the longer a person takes to seek help. If you've got a festering sore on your arm and you don't treat it, does it get better or does it get worse? Physical illnesses, mental illnesses, the earlier you get the treatment, the right support, people start to recover, they start to feel better, and they carry on with their lives. Now, workplaces can be 3 things, and I'll take you through this over the next 20 minutes. They can be a place where work can be engaging, uplifting and satisfying and bring positive meaning to your life, or they can be traumatising, disengaging and harmful, and what that does is bring additional risks to your life. An environment where people can learn and grow, and that can be a setting for intervention, and that's what I'll take you through in some detail. What can you do in your workplace to put your workplace on the right path to ensure those that could be struggling, the 78 that we talked about, 78%, how can you encourage them to seek treatment, stay with treatment and recover and lead healthy, happy, productive working lives? Let's take a look at the first one. I was working in emergency services with 000 service. Could you imagine the calls that 000 people receive? You know, when you ring 000, it's never a happy day, is it? But they take great pride in what they do, and what we did was put in place a program for them so they could manage the vicarious trauma that they'd hear over the phones. They receive 6,000 calls a day, and of those 6,000 calls, people are in crisis and suffering through no fault of their own. In fact, you'll hear me say that a lot today, that people are suffering, normally suffering in silence, and they're certainly suffering through no fault of their own. Why is work good for you? Evidence-based research, and you'll see on all the slides that I present to you today references down the bottom. My opinions aren't important. What I've done is harvested the best practice research on these issues around the world and put it together in one pack, so then you can focus on what's important for you and you can use what's relevant for you, whether you be a large business, a multinational business, a small business or even a micro business. We run these programs for hairdressers. We run these programs for half a dozen plumbers in the one suburb in capital cities so they can prepare themselves, because no one cares for small business. No one cares for the suffering that they have and the financial disadvantage they have, because they just don't have the time to access resources because they're always trying to make a dollar. So don't just think this is a vice president from a BHP talking to you about these issues. Whilst I do and have worked in a global presence, we work all the way down the chain of command in terms of size and complexity of business. Work is good for people. The research says so. And anyone that's had a long-term absence from work, whether it be work disability or unemployment, knows the negative impact on health and well-being of being out of workplaces on people. So the key to it is try and keep people as work as long as you can. Workplaces can be a risk factor, and certainly these images come from a presentation that I did for the Western Australian Government on mental health strategies for fly-in, fly-out workers, and I'll replay some of that material for you today. Really interesting that a Vice President, after 30 years being around mining companies, is an advocate for managing rosters, managing programs and putting in place support for people that work in remote communities, particularly those that are struggling on excessive shifts and shift roster patterns. Tell me if you've seen this research. It comes out of South Australia and Tasmania, and it's done by Dollard and Bailey. And what it does is provide a different approach to managing risk around psychological injury. Any of you seen this research before? Okay, Bill's seen it. 6 months ago, or 12 months ago, in Western Australia, I had 1,000 people in the room. 3 people in the room had seen it. And there is a lot of research that's been done in Tasmania and South Australia that can give you insight on how to manage this. Put your hand up if you're a OHS person or work health safety person in the room. When we've got a risk, when we've got a problem, what do we grab? What's the tool we grab out of the toolkit? Hierarchy of control. Have you found that useful over the years in solving all sorts of, I certainly have, in terms of solving physical related risk? When it comes to psychological risk, does the hierarchy of control help you? What's the first one of, what's the first step of the hierarchy of control? What's the top one? Eliminate. So what do? Stop working. It makes it hard, doesn't it? Robots. Yeah, so what we've found over the years is that the traditional hierarchy of control, which is always the tool that we go to, is the wrong tool. You need the right tool in the right toolbox. And Dollard and Bailey have come up with a different approach. And this is a different way of assessing risk, psychological risk in workplaces, either at an individual, at a team, or an organisational wide level. And it deals with policies, implementation and responsibility, managerial support, job design and individual factors relating to each job. It's complicated, but it's manageable. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that, if you have an interest in this area, to have a look at that material. And at the back end of this presentation, I'm going to take you through 5 steps that I think are better practices in this area that can probably help you. Who's seen this material? It's best practice, international best practice from Canada. Have you ever seen any Canada research? Yep, we've got one hand go up. Who are our competitors in the mining industry? The Chinese and the Japanese have been doing this for many, many years, playing the ABC game, playing us off against Australia, Brazil and Canada. Guess what? If you go to those places and look at what they're doing in these areas, they're streets ahead in terms of world's best practice in managing psychological injury, because they have remote working places. Where are the diamond mines in Canada? You know, Yellowknife and places where it's minus 28 degrees and no one lives there. Still, they've got 4 ice hockey rinks, but that's about all that is in Yellowknife. So they have similar issues, different geographies, different commodities, but they struggle with the same sorts of issues, and Canada's made some progress. So I encourage you to pull the research that's on the bottom of this document when you get the presentation material and have a look. You may find it useful. I certainly did. What are concerns for fly-in, fly-out workers? Family, home, separation, absent parents and absent partners. It's really hard to maintain a relationship when you're not there. And that's one of the big issues that happens at most kitchen tables for fly-in, fly-out workers. When there's a family crisis, they just can't be there. And that creates a significant risk of relationship breakdown and isolation. And FIFOs consider themselves temporarily and are generally disliked by the locals. However, home is not somewhere they're often enough to carry out on with a real life. I spoke to a woman in Hobart when I was presenting a month ago, and her son flies in and flies out from Burnie to the Pilbara. 28 days straight, came back for 5 days. She didn't actually recognise him when he came home, and as fast as he unpacked, he was repacking to head back again. As we know, mining companies have shed workforce significantly around Australia over recent years, and certainly as a Vice President of BHP Billiton, I've seen many mine sites where organisations or decision makers cut too deep and they cut too fast, And those that left or those that survived those round of retrenchments or terminations then really struggle with a massive workload to get the workload done, and they don't feel that they have a choice. This research comes from a House of Representatives Standing Committee in 2012 on fly in, fly out. Younger workers that go into these sorts of environments, they're unprepared for the fast lifestyle, the high disposable income, the macho culture, as well as the high incidence of drug and alcohol use and high incidence of sexually transmitted diseases. So for some young people that are unprepared for the communities they go into, it's an absolute disaster for them. If we have a look at research that was done by Lifeline around fly in, fly out and drive in, drive out people, there are a number of, and this was through a population of a little over 900 people. The research has been repeated recently with the results the same. There are a number of people that committed suicide that could be related back to the fly in, fly out operations they were working with. Most newbie workers had little knowledge of the realities of FIFO work, and they started to crumble as soon as they got there and unravel as the fatigue started to set in. And I think the big issue, and it's the dollar signs out of the pocket, workers felt trapped. Everyone spends more than we earn. What do you think the average, if the average Australian earns $1, how much does the average Australian spend? We earn $1, how much do we spend? Give me a number. Bit more. Bit more than $1.20. Bit more than $1.50. We spend $1.68. So what research tells us is that for every dollar we earn, we spend $1.68. Now, when there's a threat of job loss, you can imagine how people react. Workers felt trapped. They were financially committed to their current earning capacity and felt they were unable to leave the fly-in, fly-out arrangements. Workers felt felt vulnerable to intensive scrutiny and the threat of job loss. And 1 in 10 workers reported not having access to an EAP, and those that did have access to an EAP wouldn't use it. They were reluctant to use it because they thought it was a company resource that would work against them rather than work for them. And there was a significant number of fly-in, fly-out workers that reported using non-effective coping strategies, which is medication through substance misuse. There were a higher level divorce rate with lower wellbeing and higher stress. 81% of, and one key point to raise there, the more children they had, the worse the divorce rate was, and the greater the risk with each additional child. 81% of workers were male, and female workers were unaware of any female-focused support services at all. And when we looked, when we did this research, we didn't find any, which is quite alarming. Females were more likely to access formal supports, including EAPs and counsellors. And they felt that whereas mates will get together, blokes will get together and talk things through, women would not, particularly because of the gender issues and barriers that they saw in some of the workplaces, wouldn't seek support from their co-workers, particularly if they were male. And those that were 50 or more and had been doing this, they originally signed on to do, get in, get some money and get out, but at 50 they were still doing it. They were less likely to have any formal support at all. They relied heavily on their mates. So workplaces, and sometimes the solution can be in the problem. I just mentioned that they relied heavily on their workmates. I'll revisit that shortly. But workplace can be a setting for intervention. So you can put in a number of programs, workplace chaplaincy, Are You OK, mental health first aid, and I'll take you through those in some detail. What's needed is innovation, both at an individual, a team and an organisation-wide level. And you've got to focus on developing help-seeking behaviour. If you can encourage a person to seek help and support them as they seek help, guess what? They can stay at work. More importantly, we know, and the evidence speaks for itself, once they start seeking help, they start to recover and they can live a productive and useful working life. Develop targets, supports for different at-risk groups. There are generational gaps that we now see in workplaces. When I look around this room, you guys are sort of mid-range age, but you'll have workers that are older than you, and you'll have a lot of workers that are younger than you. And being able to bridge those gaps in terms of technology, issues, implications, actions that benefit them is really different. One size fits all doesn't work in this sort of environment. We'll talk about that a little later. Pre-employment services need to help people understand what to expect and how to cope. And certainly anything that reduces the stigma and addresses mental health literacy to overcome the suck it up culture is really important, particularly for the mining industry. I'll give you 5 steps. Let's see how we go. Promote mental health literacy. Collaborate with all stakeholders. Who would think a past member of Western Mining and a vice president of BHP would say actively collaborate with unions? I'm in Tasmania in a couple of weeks' time and I'm training union organisers because union organisers get hit with all sorts of problems around mental health issues, and bluntly they just don't know how to cope and they struggle themselves. And I'm coming back to train them in Hobart to equip them to be able to take better care of themselves and take better care of their members as they head into the Christmas period, which is always a difficult time for workplace unions or anyone that's managing people or interrelating with people in these areas. You've got to co-design models that access health clinicians, academics and providers in the community in which you work. They're out there. Some of the best research that I see in this area comes from Tasmania, which is why I enjoy working with Tasmanians, because you're willing to share, willing to collaborate and willing to have a go. You don't sit here waiting for the mainland or anyone else to solve a problem for you. You get in and give it a rip. And that's why I enjoy coming back here time after time. But you need to access those resources. You need to know where they are. You need to be able to provide links to them. And encourage all to take a broad view of the bottom line. It's a bit like the Pantene hair commercial. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. If you invest in mental health first aid, if you invest in protecting workers, guess what? You get returns. And I'll show you a slide on that shortly. You've got to destigmatise policies and guidelines, so you've got to go through those, a bit of a fine-tooth comb. You've got to check on the resources that you've got in place and ensure they're doing a good job for you. So I tend to audit those to see whether they do what they say they're doing for people. And then you've got to try and create stay-at-work programs to assist those who remain at work while dealing with mental health concerns. If you can keep them at work, we know work is good for people. If you can get them through these difficult times, if they get the right treatment, guess what? They get better, they keep going. And more importantly, they become an advocate for these programs and they share their knowledge with their co-workers and encourage them, if they see them struggling, to seek help. Step 3, to stigmatise workplace training. You need to assess third-party providers, as I've suggested, to ensure they're delivering the services to an evidence-based way or evidence-based practice way that you want. You don't need underwater macrame making going on around your organisation or deliver little value to the individuals that are partaking in those programs and very little benefit to the teams that those people work with or the organisation generally. Create opportunities for training and mentoring to enhance people management skills for workers and peer-to-peer support workers. So what we found with the research that we did with fly-in, fly-out workers, they don't listen to the boss, they don't listen to their families, which regularly change. There could be 2 or 3 families over a working life in fly-in, fly-out work. That's where all the money goes, to lawyers around divorce proceedings. And it's interesting that who do they listen to? They listen to their mates. So when we put in a program for some large mining multinationals, if they listen to their mates, train their mates on how to encourage them to seek help and provide care and provide support, emotional support while they access those clinical resources. And that's probably the most important issue when it comes to mining. Miners listen to other miners, train miners to help miners. Train families, train people at the kitchen table to support those that could be struggling, whether it be a son, a daughter, or whether it be a neighbour, to care for one another. I'm not turning evangelical here, but I think the time for waiting for governments to solve these problems are long over. The mining communities in which you operate, and certainly where I come from in Broken Hill, we'd care for each other. We'd find a way to care for one another. We'd find the knowledge, we'd find the resource, we'd make it happen as best we could amongst the communities in which we work. I think you guys really need to do the same and collaborate and share with one another. Mental health first aid training for all staff. I'm a mental health first aid instructor, so I take people through a range of issues, how to use a mental health first aid plan. Put your hand up if you're a first aider in the room. So if I, mentioned that I had diabetes and was liable to slow down during this presentation, which is hard to imagine, you'd know what to do, wouldn't you? If I flaked it on the floor and looked like I had a cardiac arrest or a stroke, you'd know what to do. So what we do is we use a similar training program to train people on how to provide care for others around long-term depression, anxiety, psychosis, substance misuse, or any mental health crisis they may face. So the mental health crisis that we train people in, similar to physical first aid, is what do you do if someone sounds suicidal? What do you do if someone's having a panic attack? What do you do if someone's having a psychosis attack or some form of substance misuse psychosis along those lines? So like a physical first aider, we train mental health first aiders in what to do and how to do it if someone's in need, whether it be an emergency situation or whether it be a chronic condition that they're battling with for some years. Does that make sense? It's not that hard and easily learned. We tend to use materials from Betty Kitchener. She's on the back of this book. I'll leave it here. One of you take it if you need it, and if you need more, just let me know. It's written in grade 7 English. I was born and raised in Broken Hill, as I mentioned. All of us know the literacy and learning issues that mining towns struggle with. So when Betty kicked off this idea 16 years ago, I said, Betty, there's only one thing you need to do. Let's make sure it's in grade 7 English. Let's make sure there's no psycho mumbo jumbo nonsense in there. So people as physical first aiders, mental health first aiders can understand what to do and how to do it in simple, easily understood terms. And that's what you produce. It's now been internationally renowned. We deliver the programs in 13 countries around the world. 2.5 million people have been trained around the world and 500,000 people have been trained in Australia, which means other parts of the world are embracing this faster than what Australia is. The RUAK program, all of you would have heard of the RUAK program by now. When I used to wear this badge 8 years ago, people would say, they'd come up to me in the street or come up to me in a plane and they'd say, what does RUOC stand for? What's RUOC all about? And back then no one knew. But now there's 1 in 4 Australians that understand what the RUOK program's about and how it encourages people to seek help and more importantly, just have a conversation if someone's not quite right. In wrapping up the presentation, yes, 1 in 4 Australians now know what it means. We have a small three paid part-time workers, small group of community ambassadors and also community outreach. And in 7.5, almost 8 years, we've now got it to a stage where 1 in 4 Australians know what the program's about and celebrate it on a regular basis. It shouldn't only happen on one day, it should happen any day that you see someone that's not tracking right or you feel needs support and care. The other thing that we do, particularly for isolated communities, is we have a digital online community, and you would have noticed on the 1st of November I work in rural Australia as well, any of the at-risk communities around Australia. And the image that we were trying to dispel was the image of a farmer with a rifle sitting in a ute at 2 o'clock in the morning and making the wrong decision. What digital online technology has now provided us with is an ability to connect people wherever they are, whenever they need access to these resources, pretty much straight away, and be able to source apps, chat lines, chat groups, or dedicated professionals, clinicians, both psychiatrists and psychologists, so people can get the resources where they need them, when they need them, which has always been a big issue for providing this sort of response for communities that are isolated, particularly mining communities or rural communities. So we have it all. What we do is we put together a strategy group or a task group that identify what are the areas that they need support in their communities or their organisations around physical wellbeing, psychological wellbeing and financial wellbeing. And then what we do is we stream that information through into those 3 buckets of knowledge And when people need it, if they're at their kitchen table and they need financial knowledge, they pick up their iPhone and they click on a button and the information comes forward to them. So they know where to go, what to do and how to manage. Because these are the things that none of us were taught in school. We weren't taught how to care for our psychological well-being, our physical well-being, or even our financial well-being. And it's only when a crisis hits a kitchen table that then we start scampering and go looking for that information double quick. So that information now gets streamed through to people 24/7. If they need a counsellor, if they need a support, they get instant response that gets them through the night and then it has an appointment waiting for them the following day. And the information can be over the internet through, we have a protected hub, so it's private and encrypted rather than just Skype, but it looks like Skype, but it's more encrypted and safer. So then counsellor and injured person can talk freely. That's how easy it is. We have targeted campaigns for at-risk groups. So we also look to those groups that are struggling where they don't have the resources, they don't have access to information, or sometimes they can have access to too much information. So the groups we work with are emergency services, rural farming communities, aquaculture, forestry, anywhere where there's lone and isolated workers or remote communities, and try and bring information to people in ways that they can understand as quickly and as readily available as they need. In wrapping up, promote psychologically safe culture, work to eliminate the stigmatisation of mental health issues. That means tackling the prevailing culture. It never goes away, and as soon as someone's struggling, people around them can act poorly. You need to intervene and provide the support that people need to get them through. Incorporate best practices for primary, secondary and tertiary prevention for mental health issues. So all the way through to hospital care, if it's needed, it's available and can be organised. And create a culture that's a safe workplace. Why do it? PricewaterhouseCoopers came out with a set of information. For every dollar you invest, you get $2.30 in return. Now, we've seen it with these physical warm-up programs. We need to do the same with mental health programs moving forward. In summary, what are the key issues? Implement training that builds self-awareness and develops psychological resilience. Develop supports that increase or help-seeking behaviour. Develop targeted supports for different at-risk groups, so you actually hit people with what they need when they need it, as opposed to thinking you know best, which means a little bit of engagement to understand what works best for a 20-year-old, to a 40-year-old, to a 50 or a 60-year-old. And develop ongoing workplace support services that reduce stigma and address mental health literacy issues. What have I learnt in doing this for 30 years? Workers are afraid to reach out for help, yet the majority of mental illnesses can be treated, allowing people to recover and remain productive at work. And finally, most people are frightened or afraid to raise mental health issues, and most feel they can't because people like us won't be supportive or can't help. You wouldn't be in this room if you weren't caring people. And hopefully some of the issues that I've covered today, which are very much at a high level, give you a framework to then take some of these issues back into your workplace and deliver improved services that will bring benefit to people. And in leaving you, if you're concerned with anyone, don't walk past them. Don't choose to look the other way. Just ask them, are they okay? And do what you can to help and support them and reach out and find the resources that you need. Thank you. Have we got time for a question or two?
Yes.
Any questions? I covered a lot. It sounds big business, but as I said, you can apply those same sort of methods in half a dozen plumbers working in a suburb or even a hairdresser shop, which I've done over recent years.
Steve, what's the degree of collaboration between providers? I'm aware of one guy who's I'm particularly impressed with, and that's a fellow by the name of Wayne Schwartz, who was both a North Melbourne and Sydney footballer. And he was he's been in the closet for some years, and he's come out and he's involved with a group called Pucker Up. Is there a coordination between those providers in this space, Steve?
Some of them tend to want to go their own way, and people being people, mine's always bigger than yours, and I can't imagine there'd be any of those behaviours with psychologists and psychiatrists or other well-wishers around programs. So what we do is we don't try and impose the program on people, so we have a service delivery model and a method. So what we do is we bring together the best that serve the community in which we work. So with rural communities, I point to Raw Tasmania. Do you know about Raw Tasmania? Rural Alive and Well? One of the better programs that highlights collaboration. And what we do is then take that information to people. We only ever work with people that collaborate together. And if someone has an existing program, I work with McKillop Family Services that specialise in trauma and family support and family care. And that would be a program that we encourage people to look. So we look at what are the issues, what are the problems you're trying to solve, where are the best practice leaders in that community, and we approach them. And we ask them to host their information, provide their resources available, and what that does is build collaboration. So we use Beyond Blue, we use Mental Health First Aid, we use the Are You OK program, we use whatever works for people. If people find it useful and they're going to use it, it's going to be in there.
I think a number of people were at the forum in Strong about a month ago where John Clark from Raw spoke. It was extremely impressive, great advocate for it.
Yeah, and John's battled his own demons and been able to come through the other side. And John and I co-presented in Lonnie a few months back, and an outstanding contributor to what he's doing and the Raw program in itself. But they all struggle with government funding. They all struggle with all those sorts of issues. What we do is provide a platform that can actually take that information to people from their perspective cost effectively and encourage that message. But rather than impose a solution, we look at what works for a particular industry, a particular group. If there's things that are working in that industry, well, they get plugged in straight away. Thanks, Bill. Any last questions? Well, thanks, everyone. Enjoy steamy Queenstown, and look forward to catching up as work takes me around this state in coming months. Take care, everyone.